So today we're going to talk about what does it mean to pursue. The dictionary says it means to follow something or someone in order to catch them. It also says to go after or run after, to continue to proceed along a path. So we're concerned about the original language used in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11. The original language, meaning it's a language that it was originally spoken in or written in, which has different meanings. You know how a story at work gets started over here, the original story, the truth that happened, and by the time it gets to this side of the workforce, it's a totally different story, or it's all messed up and taken out of context. So the original language here in pursue in 1 Timothy 6:11, you go back to the Greek, it says to pursue with haste or to chase after. So we're all chasing after something, wealth, career, a degree, recognition, the opposite sex if you're looking for a mate. So today we're going to talk about pursuing, and specifically a book written by A.W. Tozer called The Pursuit of God. So we're going to have a guest on the show, Christian Robinson, a good friend of mine, and we're going to have a discussion about this. So stay tuned, and hope you enjoy. All right, as I said before, we're going to talk about The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. Here's a copy of it right here. Tonight, I've got a special guest with me, Christian Robinson, a good friend of mine, and we're going to talk about this together. What I want to do is I've got 3 different excerpts from his book, and I'm going to read those and we're going to discuss them. So he's talking about, and this is in 1948 when he wrote this book, so the church at the time, he thought, was in bad shape. And maybe it was, but it's all in perspective. And today, you look at today's church, if he was to see it now, he would think, oh my, people have really went astray. And it's been, all about self now, and so much self-worship. But anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to read these excerpts from the book and we'll discuss those. And here's what he says. We have been trying to apply machine-age methods to our relationships with God. We read our chapter, we have our short devotions, and rush away, hoping to make up for our deep inward bankruptcy by attending another gospel meeting or listening to another thrilling story told by a religious adventurer lately returned from afar. The tragic result of this spirit are all about us. Shallow lives, hollow religious philosophies, the preponderance of the element of fun in gospel meetings, the glorification of men, which is interesting, trust in religious externalities, quasi-religious fellowships, salesmanship methods, the mistaking of dynamic personality for the power of the Spirit. These, and such as these, are the symptoms of an evil disease. And he goes on to say, it's a deep and serious malady of the soul. For this great sickness that is upon us, not one person is responsible, and no one Christian is wholly free from blame. We have all contributed directly or indirectly to this sad state of affairs. We have been too blind to see, or too timid to speak out, or too satisfied to desire anything better than the poor average diet with which others appear satisfied. To put it differently, we have accepted one another's notions, copied one another's lives, and made one another's experiences the model for our own. And for a generation, several generations now, for a generation the trend has been downward. Now we have reached a low place of sand and burnt wire grass. And worst of all, we have made the word of truth conform to our experience and accepted this low plane as the very pasture of the blessed. That's some very strong and deep, true statements there. Christian, what do you think he means by this state of the church back then?
To me, it just kind of highlights things that we deal with on a daily basis, but for the church to be going through that back in the 1940s, and to see that here now, and maybe even more so to an extent where it's just kind of flagrantly being propped up, like those self-inducing what do you call it, just chasing after those things that we really just we know are wrong, but yet we do it anyways. And even if you're a person who lives on the outside of, maybe a religious perspective, but has like a moral compass that they kind of go by, one could see that a lot of what we deal with these days is like social media, and you can name a handful of things. Facebook, you can get into YouTube, but it has a lot to do with being self-serving. And so the disease or the sickness he's talking about, it reminds me of like a person that's terminal. The doctors tell us they have so much time to live. That person, I would imagine, would want to change, or at least do things better, or enjoy life that they have that's left, and do things differently from what they were doing prior.
Right.
But how do you know if you're sick?
Right.
There are symptoms most likely that go with that sickness.
Right. They don't
Right.
see it.
And they don't see it. It talks about people being blind to that, and or accepting that willingly, even though they have truth right in front of them. Like,
Right.
there's something definitely wrong, but they're choosing to live that way anyways. And I think we can all come to the agreement that, maybe there's very fine-tuned points in our life where we can probably think, hey, that's something we've been through,
Don't you think a lot of times that would be called distractions, for one thing? You talk the Facebook and
Yeah.
things of the world. So it's a self-denial that, he talks about giving up yourself and taking up your cross and following me.
Yeah.
And we talked about that a couple episodes ago or so. But don't you think a lot of this is lack of surrender? We're talking about pursuing God, but to pursue God, don't we have to, like you said, we have to lay the past behind. We have to we die. We're buried with him in baptism. The old man is gone, the new man has come. So therefore, it's a new way of life. And that new way of life, there is sacrifice. So the old man, the wants and desires, the me and what I want is gone.
Right.
And I think also, he touches on here the external stuff that don't make a difference. When you're standing before God, it's not going to matter what color the carpet is at church that people argue about, what color the windows are, what color the painting is behind the baptistry. None of that stuff will matter. It's all external that he's talking about. So I think he's right on target talking about that stuff. And I think it doesn't take 2020 vision for somebody to look at the church and say, he's pretty well on target. When you stand out of the box and look at it, he's pretty well on target, because, in this culture, you see a lot of people in the 20s leaving the church because they don't know God. They went through the motions. And I've had one tell me, a coworker, he says, I've give up on God. And he says the church is bleeding 20-year-olds. And he's definitely right, because they haven't known God here. You know how the Bible says, and you mentioned earlier about, some people, will stand before God and God will say to them, depart from me, I never knew you. And they'll say, but I did this, your name, that, and the other. I did X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But they didn't have their soul, they didn't have their heart right with God. They didn't give themselves fully to him. So I would say, in an introductory into this, giving your life fully to Christ is one requirement. What do you think?
100%. Now, I would want to kind of place this in there for you, just maybe for people to think about, because it's easy to say surrender your life to God, but what does that look like? What's that mean?
Right.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I know I have, because I'm a visual learner, and to read something but not to see it is completely two different. I mean, I'm not gonna probably learn as well as someone else who has the ability to read something, but really it comes down to, knowing the Lord is a relationship. So if you want to know the Lord, what do you got to do with any kind of relationship? You got to be in some kind of dialogue. And I know one person at work, we were just talking about this, and he had a whole life where he knows the Lord, but he doesn't, ascribe to that belief in him, the Christian faith. But he's had experiences where, all he wanted was a dialogue with God. He wanted to hear God.
Right.
And I think for many people, that's, a big subject that people want to know maybe a little bit more. So to speak into like getting to know God, knowing God, you need a perspective that's different from what we've been programmed.
Right.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, it's good that you hit on that because, I talk about the 20-year-olds. Even before that, people, their families would force them to go to church. I would see it in my generation too.
Yeah.
They would go through the motions simply because their parents didn't make it important to them. The parents didn't live it the rest of the week. Sports was more important, or whatever else was more important in their life.
Oh yeah.
And so, we had Jesus on the shelf through the week. He looked pretty, but on church we'd go give him that hour or two. But then, and because it's not taught, it's not embedded in people's mind. It's not a ceremony. It's not like going to the movies or seeing a play. You don't go to church. You are the church. And then
Right.
that's the big mess. That's the big, not mess, but the big misunderstanding of the whole word relationship.
Yeah.
And,
Might have a bad taste in your mouth if you put it that way.
like my friend from work does. Yes.
Yeah.
So lastly, and to wrap this up, we're going to read an excerpt from the book again. And just, by the way, if you need a copy of this, I can get one for you. Real easy, just let me know, comment in the comments below, and let me know. But he says this, and we'll close with this one. He says, what God in his sovereignty may yet do on a worldwide scale, I do not claim to know. But what he will do for the plain man or woman who seeks his face, I believe, I do know, and can tell others. Let any man turn to God in earnest. Let him begin to exercise himself into godliness. Let him seek to develop his power of spiritual receptivity. That's a key word. We just don't pray to God. We are receptive to him, and he speaks to us through his word. He speaks to us in silence, in meditation, and he speaks to us through others and events. Anyway, he says, let him seek to develop his power of spiritual receptivity by trust, obedience, and humility. And the result will exceed anything he may have hoped in his learned or weaker days. Any man who by repentance and a sincere return to God, key word, will break himself out of the mold in which he has been held and will go to the Bible itself for spiritual standards, he will be delighted with what he finds there. And this is hope this is kind of like, there is hope. And that's what this book is all about. And this is just the introduction to it. But we see the problem, we know how the problem got there, and there is hope. And it requires actions, sacrifice on our behalf to do that. Anything you want to add to that, Christian?
If you're kind of struggling in that place where you know the Lord, you've given your life over, and you're kind of like just stuck. You don't feel like God's moving your life, or you feel like you've not really been a good son or daughter, I guess, to him, and you kind of feel ashamed of that. One thing you should know is that God says that nothing can separate you from his love. And the point of hope, I love that word hope, because it's so important, especially in our faith walk. If you have nothing to hope in, you're gonna fall. You're not gonna have anything to stand on.
No motivation.
No motivation. And that's Christ is that hope. So defining what hope is in your life, knowing that God has given you a purpose and has made you into a beautiful thing and is continuing to sanctify you and make you into that finished product, because he is our what do you call it? He is the potter, we're the clay.
Right.
So if you are willing to be molded and grafted into that perfect design that he has in mind, then you're going to see great things. But not all the time will you see great things immediately. And I think we get discouraged when we don't see something immediately happen. Right. So don't give up. Hope in the Lord. Trust in him in all your ways, and he'll make a way for you. But I just love the fact that you've brought this to our attention, and I just appreciate you having me here. And thank you.
You're welcome, and thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being here, Christian. And that's all for this week. And again, next week we'll have part 2 of Pursuing God. And again, it's a very available book, A.W. Tozer. Just let me know if you need a copy. It's very deep stuff and help get you started on the right path to a more intimate relationship. Have a good week.